As bad as learning about female circumcision may be, unfortunately, it doesn't inhibit your ability to become an engineer. Unfortunately, learning that evolution doesn't exist doesn't mean that you cannot be an expert salesperson or someone with great literacy. The problem with the opposition case is that they confuse propaganda with the ability to destroy people's understanding of education and destroy people's futures in the economy. That simply isn't true. Having different interpretations about what is morally correct and what isn't, unfortunately, is not something that is so useful to developing nations who just need people who can do specific work to boost the economy of their local communities. Let's get into this. First of all, I'm going to look at the how politics plays into the education system. Then I'm going to analyze their alternative. Then I'm going to explain why we still have a great capacity for good change. And finally, some weighing. So let's look at how politics is integrated into their education systems. They say on our side of the house, there's way too much concentrated radicals in these communities. And that means they're going to propagandize. That means there's going to be more corruption. We explained to you that actually these federal controlled education systems are probably going to be much worse. Why? Because, well, they still have to be voted in every year. Compare that to local elections, which are significantly less important, which have significantly less political power, which have significantly less corruption because there's less money that is involved. That obviously means that this is something that is really being overblown. But let's just first attack this at the premise, because I think this is a very highly assertive claim from the other team. In most of these situations, they lack a traditional hierarchy in these communities because there isn't really a need for them. For example, you have bakers, you have agricultural workers, you have engineers, you have lawyers. That doesn't really leave much room to discuss the politics in such a small, concentrated community. They simply would be inefficient with one. They're often apolitical as well because, like they explain, these people often already have a very low political capital. It's not something that they're educated about, and it's not something that is relevant to majority of their life, and they don't have time for it as well. So I think already that diminishes the characterization that we've been given from the other team. The second response is to say that by their own characterization, they said there was going to be democratic accountability. So I'm unsure why they think a highly integrated community where parents are able to discuss their children's futures is likely going to mean that the corruption is so concentrated and no one can stand against them. The third response is to say that the main interest is voting, which means that they want power. That's the incentive behind why you would want to fluctuate those votes, why do you want to control those votes. But, that power only comes when you have a better economy, right? So I think we just flip this, because the prioritization of these local governments, even if they are highly corrupt, is that they want to boost the economy of that local region. They don't really have a reason to get more power unless there's more money in it, and they can't have more money unless there's more tax. And where did that come from? It comes from more businesses opening up. It comes from people actually working. And that is why it is so imperative that we have these local communities, because regardless of their incentives, one of those incentives is always going to be to make the economy better, so even that they can be more powerful. But that doesn't mean that other people cannot also benefit. Okay, let's look at their alternative. They explain that there are going to be it's going to be a much more federal oversight with local councils and national material sharing. That's a major win condition on how they want to use resources. 3 responses to this. First off, I think this is relatively overblown, right? Because it doesn't necessarily mean that when you're being taught, you're only going to be learning social studies. Where's the math? Where's the physics? Where's the science and the discussion about their education? They frame it like the only thing you're learning in school is social studies, is morality. I really think they have overblown a significant amount of the characterization. Second, there's an unclear link to the types of education that exists. So we still get students who are great salesmen. We still get students who are very, very good engineers. Even if this is majority of their education is about social issues, I really do not understand why they couldn't succeed in all of the other subjects that they had, which were completely exclusive in terms of the philosophy from other subjects. The third reason is that, caring about the brain drain from a federal in a federal government is a federal government incentive, which is exactly why they want students not to be educated, so that they can't lose the doctors who they wasted a bunch of resources, the national sharing of material on, just for them to leave to another country. It is that sort of corrupt incentive which leads these federal governments to ensuring that education is significantly worse for these schools. So I think we just flip this, making the locals who have low political capital, who don't have as much money, stupid, is a huge incentive of these federal governments, and it is for that reason that you have to support local communities coming together to control their education. Now, why do we have the capacity? This is another significant harm that the opposition team thinks is a slam dunk. 3 responses. First, obviously funding was likely going to be something that the government provides anyways. It's just something that occurs. It's something that we know intuitively. There is never no spending on the government from education. It is a demand from the public. It will always be there. It makes your government more legitimate. Second, that most parents care about it, and that means that parents often can come help in education. There are people who genuinely care in the community about their children, and so they're probably going to study themselves up, who are going to go into these schools and help. They don't have to necessarily be nationally qualified, which we think is just an added layer of bureaucracy that the opposition team is defending. The third thing to explain, though, is that these local communities having, wanting education to be smart is probably why it is something that is so good about it, because it's such a small concentrated community, and that means the education system, even though it is less prioritized, is still significantly more prioritized compared to the federal government, who has to think about economic policy, fiscal policy, all these other fields, maintaining roads, exports and imports. These are other things that they have to think about, which means that education is always less prioritized. Let's then look at the weighing. So 3 reasons, 3 things that we've done better than them. First of all, we have much more certain benefits on the link between education and the ability for you to get a good job, because majority of their material is just saying that, well, you're going to learn that evolution didn't occur. Well, unfortunately, that isn't a reason why people aren't going to be engineers. That isn't a reason why people aren't going to be doctors. Learning about that sort of stuff simply is not that important. It just is in a Western liberal democracy where we've already had a really good education, and now we can think about those other philosophical questions. The second thing is that the margin of benefit, even if true, was low. Okay, sure, but maybe girls go into work and that's a bad thing, because I would rather have the women work at home and help their children than being sent off to work at a slave company like making clothes, because that's probably what the federal government wants. They're scared that if they become a doctor, if they become a CEO, if they become something that is successful, that they're just going to leave another country. And that's why on their side of the house, it doesn't matter if we solve these inequality issues if they just go to another form of inequality. The third thing is that their win condition is around resources. But this is just not specific to the debate, and is absolutely a low margin of benefit, because unless that resource is a teacher, it really doesn't matter. Teaching 1 + 1 doesn't require a lot of very specific learning materials. It's about the people who do it. And finally, of course, our education is better. We want people to be selfish in these local politics, because it means that they want people to eventually open businesses. It means that they want to force students to stay in school so that their economy can better. All the incentives lie with team proposition.